Kindly Kel here. In my previous video, I mentioned how Fromsoft's approach to difficulty hasn't really changed from Kingsfield to Shadow of the Erdtree. I've also been replaying Dark Souls with my buddy Plague of Gripes, and it's had me thinking about how the games have evolved over time in a broader sense. So I thought it'd be fun to explore how Fromsoft has gradually iterated on their past successes and failures. This will be the first in a series of videos that was originally going to be one gigantic video. We'll be starting with Demon Souls and working our way up to Elden Ring. The point of these videos is to see how the games have changed over time, but since there's no prior Souls game to Demon Souls, we'll just be going over its major components for this video. Hopefully, by the end we'll have a better understanding of what the Souls games are and what made them so successful. What is the fundamental essence of the Souls games that has so many developers chasing them? Demon Souls is a dark fantasy action role-playing game. It was commissioned by Sony to give their PlayStation 3 users a fantasy RPG experience to rival Microsoft's exclusivity of Oblivion. It shares some DNA with Kingsfield, Fromsoft's flagship IP prior to the Souls games, most notably with their similar tone and world building. It seems very likely to me that the creators are fans of tabletop RPGs, and like any twisted dungeon master, they love to create vicious worlds for their players to struggle through. That's how I view their games, at least. Like I'm playing Dungeons & Dragons and my DM is a real piece of work. The project stalled during development, and the now president of Fromsoft, Hidetaka Miyazaki, was able to take full control of the project with very little oversight. This gave him and his team a huge amount of liberty to make an experience they wanted to make, rather than one designed to please publishers. To give an example why that can be a good thing, I recently played Ghost Recon Wildlands and experienced a nauseating effect from the amount of on-screen tooltips. It's an overwhelming amount of UI, almost assuredly put in at the publisher's insistence to help players who are confused. In my opinion, avoiding publisher pitfalls like these was foundational to creating the Souls games. Not because players like being confused, but because they like being able to figure things out for themselves. The levels of Demon Souls only ever feature one checkpoint, usually with shortcuts being unlocked to make backtracking less punishing. Each level is a gauntlet of encounters designed to test the player's ability to adapt to a variety of ambushes and traps. You may notice how rare it is for enemies to just be standing out in the open, waiting for you to challenge them. Usually, they will be hiding around corners, trying to ambush you. This can get a little frustrating and predictable, but it works in this setting to make the enemies seem somewhat intelligent. In fact, usually when enemies are out in the open, it's more of a warning about engaging them directly. The Red-Eyed Knight in 1-1 of Boletaria is a good example. The traps of Demon Souls are quite punishing, but usually stick out if the player is being observant. They show how these areas were defended, which adds a lot to the experience in my opinion. Traps are something we saw a lot more of in these early games. In contrast, Elden Ring sequestered almost all of its traps to the catacombs for some reason. The inhabitants of the Lands Between were willing to use traps to defend their dead, but not their homes, I guess. Each level of Demon Souls is capped with a boss fight, which upon defeating unlocks a new area and checkpoint. And each boss is carefully designed to provide a unique encounter. Phalanx is incapable of defending itself, and the real challenge comes from handling multiple adds at once. Tower Knight can be toppled over, allowing the player to hit its head for massive damage. And the Penetrator can be fought with an NPC ally. These kinds of fights are now mostly known as gimmick bosses, which I find disheartening. Making bosses have unique ways of overcoming them helps them stand out. Later games in the series would focus on the presentation of the boss, and the actual gameplay for fighting them doesn't stand out nearly as much. For example, everyone remembers how cool Hoaraloo is with his sick wrestling moves. But who remembers just avoiding his attacks and spamming jump attacks or Ashes of War on him? Hoaraloo is memorable not because he's an interesting fight, but because he looks cool, and he has great animations that are fun to watch. Overall, the gameplay of Demon Souls is just serviceable. It's slow, and once animations have begun, you can't interrupt them. This means that the player has to commit to every action, rather than just swinging willy-nilly and reacting to threats as they come. This isn't amazing gameplay at all, but it works in service to the overall experience because it forces the player to consider every engagement. The game as a whole is an experience, and the combat is merely one part of that experience. I find that many players, and even some developers, don't quite understand that. That's why I talked about the level design first, because I think it's actually more important than the combat in this game. The remake is a good example of this misunderstanding. They preserved the exact gameplay of Demon Souls, but failed at capturing the original tone. The epitome of this tonal failure is in the Maiden Astraea boss fight. The music is changed to be more epic and orchestral, which contradicts with the player murdering a saint and her knight in a dingy swamp. This is meant to be a moment of reflection, where the player questions their actions. But if you look at the comments for the remake's version, you'll find people suggesting that the player is the boss. Instead of questioning themselves, these players just felt like a big man for becoming a murderer. I'd go as far to say that the original experience was mutilated.
Do as you like. Take your precious demon soul.
I hope this illustrates why gameplay isn't the most important feature of the Souls series. Healing in Demon Souls is a direct continuation from Kingsfield, even taking the same shape, grass. It comes in limited quantities, so if you run out, you have to farm to replenish your stock. It can also be somewhat circumvented by using equipment that heals you over time, or by using a healing miracle if you have the mana. This is probably the weakest aspect of gameplay in Demon Souls. It's a vital resource that you can run out of, and it creates downtime, either via waiting for HP to regenerate from healing equipment, or by farming. Either way, it's just extra time spent not actually making any progress. Death is much more punishing in Demon Souls compared to the later games. Your HP is halved, and your body is lost, leaving you in soul form. This is done to encourage the player to engage with the online mechanics. While you're in soul form, you can either put your summon sign down, or invade other players to regain your body form. While in body form, you can summon other players to help you, but you can also be invaded. The tendency of players to help or hinder one another is reflected by another mechanic called World Tendency. World Tendency is used to alter the experience of the players. Repeated deaths in body form will lower World Tendency, making levels significantly harder by adding extra enemies, while killing bosses raises World Tendency, which increases the player's damage while in soul form. This also contributes to a global World Tendency, which is a server average of player World Tendency and affects everyone on the server. Meaning that if players are invading and killing each other a lot, the game becomes more difficult for everyone. But if they're helping each other, then it becomes easier. In a way, the state of the world reflects the state of the players. It's a very novel idea, but it alienates some people who want a more isolated experience.
What is it?
Character progression comes with a subtle caveat. You are empowering yourself by turning the souls of the dead into strength for yourself. The process of leveling up mirrors how the demons grow stronger by feeding on souls. And before being able to level up, you even have to ask the Maiden in Black to turn souls into strength for you.
Let these ownerless souls become thine own.
As you become stronger, it's implied that you're becoming closer to demon than man.
I'm impressed. Yes, indeed I am. Stay the path, and you will soon be a monster yourself.
This is also reflected in some of the equipment the player can acquire. The absolute best example is the equipment designed for spellcasters. The Monk's Head Collar, the Ring of Magical Sharpness, and the Crisp Blade all increase your magic damage, but lower your magic defense. And magic is a power that's closely associated with demons. So as the player's power grows to resemble demons, their ability to resist their power weakens. The Monk's Head Collar even implies that it's using the player as a vessel. And there's also the Insanity Catalyst, which says, causes insanity in the wielder and drastically increases the strength of spells, but halves the wielder's maximum MP. MP in Demon Souls is raised by increasing your intelligence. Thus, equipping the Insanity Catalyst means your intelligence has been lowered. You have surrendered your mind to the demons. This seduction by the demon's power is reflected in the game's characters as well. Frake believes that cutting off the world from the soul arts is a tragic loss, and he feels this way because of his thirst for demonic knowledge.
And I now have the answer, and it is a resounding no.
Opposite of Frake is Urbane, who claims to hear the word of God, but is frightened by the sound of his God when he really hears it.
Like a poor, hungry child. Do you have any idea what it might be? Something about it puts me at great unease.
Urbane believed that miracles were granted to the faithful as a way to combat the demons, completely blind to the idea that they could be related. But it's revealed to us by the Talisman of Beasts. The symbol of God was nothing more than the image of the Old One. Meaning Urbane is also performing demonic arts, under a different name. Magic in this universe is directly tied to the Old One, hence why both miracles and sorcery function, because of our close proximity. I greatly enjoy this explanation, and I wish some of the later games put as much thought into it. Magic is something inherently fantastical, so having a basic understanding of why it works helps ground the setting. The Old One itself doesn't appear to have any kind of agency. It's more like a great beast that wakes up hungry and eats souls to survive. Importantly, it doesn't wake up on its own, it's roused by King Allant, setting the game's events into motion. The Old One isn't an evil creature by nature, rather it's a means of reflecting the nature of the world onto itself, exactly like how global world tendency functions for the players. It's a force of destruction that has only began when man's greed for power wakes it. This theme of greed and the temptation of power is so wonderfully interwoven into the game's story and mechanics that I believe it makes Demon Souls the most conceptually complete Souls game. Possibly the most complete concept of any game. The publisher Sony, perhaps overburdened with the development of Paul Blart Mall Cop, denied releasing Demon Souls internationally, despite its heavy Western fantasy influences. So Fromsoft turned to Atlus and Namco Bandai, who did release it internationally. It was a surprise hit that received very little marketing and spread mostly by word of mouth, thus beginning the Souls craze. The only real critique I can offer Demon Souls is the weapon upgrade system. It requires different upgrade materials for every path, and players can lose access to some materials permanently, locking them out of those upgrade paths. It's very esoteric and basically requires the player to look up a guide. And my first run through the game was made very frustrating because I didn't use any such guides. Fromsoft would begin iterating on Demon Souls immediately with Dark Souls, carrying over ideas they liked and creating a game that shines just as brilliantly in completely different ways. But many of those reused ideas would lose their identity right here, with the end of Demon Souls. I hope I've illustrated why it was so impactful and why it's still the favorite among some of the older Souls fans. In my next video, I'll be contrasting Demon Souls with Dark Souls. Until then.
You have a heart of gold. Don't let them take it from you.